Hello and welcome to episode number 3. So today I have it titled as What is Happening Today? And it kind of came out of just what's going on for me in this moment. I don't know, something switched yesterday for me, and I'm not in the most lightest of moods, I guess I would say. And so what's interesting is when this shows up for me often, I don't actually really talk to people that much, or whatever's going on, I don't really talk about it. And yet there's a lot of things that I do look at while I'm kind of in this state. And one of the things that I was aware of, that I'm definitely not being me, and I'm also not choosing to change that in this 10 seconds. And it's interesting because as I was kind of mentioning that, I don't really choose to talk about it. And so in that, choosing to kind of describe what some things that just show up. And for me, it's just some of the things that I was looking at, and the space that I have been in the last day or so. It's one of those times when asking the question, something like, who does this belong to, doesn't necessarily create a shift, and hasn't created a shift. And so then where I go when that shows up, I'm aware that I can always choose something different. I can always choose to just be different. And in this 10 seconds, I'm actually not choosing that. And I also know that there's sometimes times like this that there is information that we get, and by not automatically changing it, that we stay in this and sit with this for a while, that there's something that we become aware of. And so as I was sort of looking at some of these things, and yesterday we actually had a bars exchange at our house, and I just went down and got my bars run, and I didn't really talk to anyone when I was there. At one point, it was interesting. I don't remember if I was gifting or receiving at this point, but I really did realize that this wasn't me, that whatever it is that I'm choosing at this moment wasn't me. And it was kind of interesting just to acknowledge that, and it was like this moment where I was like, this is interesting. Whatever this is. And it was this acknowledgement that it was something, and I was aware of something, and it wasn't, there wasn't this sense of like, oh, this is running me. It was more a sense of something is going on, and I'm aware of this, and it was almost like, I don't know, I can't even put it into words at this moment. It was almost like I was aware of choosing to be this, and if I was to look at it if I was to kind of expand it out, it wasn't significant, I guess, in my world. Like, the energy that I was choosing to be, I was just looking at it almost like an interesting choice. It was almost like looking at it as an interesting point of view. And so then this morning there was this piece of intensity that I became aware of. And so I was asking about it last night, actually, this thing around intensity. And one of the questions when you're choosing something that you think you shouldn't be choosing, you can ask yourself, what is it about this that I actually enjoy or I like? And how is it actually working for me, I guess, in a sense. And I haven't really used that question in the way it was intended to be used. And so I was looking at, so this piece of intensity that I'm aware of in different parts of my life, what part of this intensity works for me? And it's a really looking at, again, acknowledging these places that we go, these things that we do, that kind of put us, that when you actually acknowledge that something's working for you, and it may seem insane to somebody else, and it may actually seem insane to you as well, that you really start looking at, okay, so it's basically getting kind of honest with yourself. And it's like looking at this maybe piece that seems like a strange choice, and saying, okay, so where does it work for me? Like, because I see it showing up and I keep on choosing it, so there must be something about it that actually does work for me, and what might that be? And so that was one thing I was looking at it, and I wasn't really also looking at it necessarily in the sense that it was going to, that the answer was going to show up. It was more just looking at that energy and acknowledging that in some sort of way, this energy of choosing that does work for me. And then so what it does too is it creates this space that the next time it shows up, whether or not I will choose it again or not choose it. And so that was kind of one of the things that I was looking at. And then the other thing that I was looking at actually is kind of this thing to do with control. And I had a conversation yesterday about this topic about control in particular, and the way it was talked about is how using somebody as an example, and it was a really cool thing to see in this example of how what we sometimes do when we don't have control, or that when you actually live your life trying to control everything, that when you then get put into situations or choose situations which are literally hard to control or kind of uncontrollable, it kind of short circuits your world, and it kind of puts you into a place where you don't know how to function in the way that you normally would function. And so then, because you're used to having some sort of control in your life in certain situations, that kind of gives you a sense of that you're able to be you. When you then are faced with this place of being out of control, essentially, where you don't actually have control anymore, that you don't know how to be you, that you actually then choose not to be you, that you end up being in a way that you normally wouldn't be, because there is no that reference point of who you normally be isn't there. And this is often when people use the term that they have to be grounded. Grounding is more or less more just as it's a reference point in your life. And it's a thing that we do to make us feel normal or something like that. I'm probably not using the words that I know I could use sometimes. But it's really this place where we look to create something normal in our life, which in reality nothing actually ever is. We aren't normal at all. There's absolutely nothing normal about us. And so it's a place where we go to create a connection with this reality and to be part of this reality. And it's weird because we are all living in this reality, and we are all far, far beyond what this reality actually is. And I remember hearing a thing recently where Gary, I think, was talking about this same thing, and he was talking about that we aren't in this reality, the reality is in us. We are really beyond. When we really look at what we are far beyond this reality. And so this reality is actually part of us. We don't have to try to fit into it because it's not possible for us to do that. What we can do is we can use this reality to create something different. And I don't know where I was going with this, but it's really this with these connections points. And so anyways, this whole conversation around control, I was looking at using this example of control in this person's life, where it is what I do or what we do in our lives to control things. And control can look like all kinds of things. And it certainly can look like what I've been choosing, in the sense that I'm choosing not to be light. I'm choosing not to really connect with people and communicate with people. And that's essentially it's a way of controlling my experience, my so-called reality, because I'm choosing not to engage. That is my form of controlling what shows up in my world. And so I was starting to look at that. I was starting to look at that piece of, and it was really interesting because in this moment anyways, there's no judgment in my world of me per se. I'm choosing this. I'm aware that I can change it. And I'm really looking at these different places, and it's kind of interesting because had this not shown up in this way, I probably wouldn't look at this type of aspect of control in me. And I'm also not looking at it in making myself wrong. I'm just looking at it. And I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at where is it that I use that in my life, and how I use that in my life, and how that affects my daily life in choosing different ways that I choose to control myself, or choose to control my reality. And I'm aware that by choosing that, and if I continue to choose it, it won't actually always create truly what I desire to create more in this world. And so that's kind of really what I came to realize today as I was going to do this weekly show, is talking about where we really what shows up, and how these situations that we choose, how it creates a certain space in our world. And if you're willing to, instead of just trying to put it away, like I said, it can create a place where you can get a lot of information. And so it's interesting in this last day, the different threads that I've been looking at, the different things that I've been looking at, and the different instead of just trying to make it go away. And again, there's no right or wrong to this, and I'm just aware what this, by choosing this, to be more aware of what the space is, it does create this allowance, I guess, for myself to be. And I have gained this information. I have gained these things that I wouldn't have otherwise probably even looked at. I probably would have never looked at how, by choosing this, what it creates in my world. And it was interesting because I was also reading a book last night. I actually binge read a book. I just read the whole book in longer than it probably should have taken me. But I ended up reading this book called Molly's Game, and it's based on it was written by her, and she had a poker ring that she ran in New York and LA for a number of years, and everything that went on in her life. And it was interesting to look at, because that's actually what prompted me to look at the whole piece of intensity. Because in her world, the way she describes it, there was so much intensity, there was so much about, and an extreme amount of control, and there was so much intensity all the time. And in the book, she talks about this, like it was almost like it was too much, and yet that's what actually kept her going. So for her, it was this thing, like this intensity was the thing that actually kept things moving for her, and it was something that she thrived on, because she was constantly having to expand and be more and look at what else she could create to keep it going, actually. And if she would have not done that, if she would have just stopped and not kept things moving, it would have just fallen apart. And so it was this constant, her choosing to have to be and show up and look at what else was possible and look at what else she had to create to keep this going. And not only to keep it going, but to also expand it and to create something bigger. And it was this constant push. And she, as intense as it was, it also actually worked for her. And that's why she kept on choosing it, until something did change within her and various circumstances came about and it no longer worked anymore. And so it's really interesting in seeing, and she also talked about it in the book, like by choosing all these different things, it got to a part where she realized she was not being her, and she was choosing things that didn't create more as her, for her in her life. And it also, she also started having less fun in in the end of it. And I think that's really the big thing, and that's probably one of the things that I've been looking at. There can be intensity, and intensity isn't wrong or right, it's just intensity. And there are going to be these times where, and that's kind of what I was looking at right now. I'm like, well, where are all the things that actually really light me up? And what would it be like to choose those always? And I've been doing a lot more of that, and I've actually been doing a lot more of asking those kinds of questions. Whereas in the past, when something showed up, I would just say yes. And now I'm actually asking, would I actually like to do this? Because I know I can do these things. It's not whether or not I'm capable or not. And I know I am. And I'm also asking, will it create more in my life? Will it actually create the future that I would like to create? And it's interesting because some of these things that have shown up, I have got a no on it. And so I've actually said no, which in the past I just would have said yes. And this is starting to show up more and more in my life. And I realize that by looking at that, by choosing that, it does actually create more. And things are shifting. And then there's still gonna be some moments once in a while like today. And like that I'm going through right now. And I'm also, what has changed for me, when in the past I would have situations like this, I would make myself wrong for it. So I have much more allowance for me. And there will come a point when I'm like, okay, I've done enough of whatever I'm choosing, and it's time to choose something else. And also what I've noticed is the time that it takes to move through this kind of space, or whatever it is, heaviness, has changed and is much shorter. And so these are just some of the things that I've noticed, and it's really I've talked about it, or in our weekly show at Reality Unchecked, we've talked about it too, is really having that allowance for yourself, that allowance for you, where if things aren't showing up the way you would like them to show up, that and you are in this tensity, or this grumpy, or this shut down place, or this place where you aren't a lot of space and you aren't actually being you, that you actually have enough space that you give yourself allowance to actually be this. And there will be a point where it's like, okay, I'm done with choosing this and whatever it is, and I'm ready to choose something else. And the beautiful thing is I have tons of people around me that are super supportive, and I can always ask them questions, and I can always ask for them to ask me some questions around something if and when I'm willing to change whatever it is. And so I have that. I have people in my life. In fact, I was talking to my sister earlier today, and she knew that I wasn't willing to shift in that moment, and she was definitely the energy of the invitation of, when you're ready, I'm here. There's other people in my life that are here, my roommates and so on. And so I know I have that available to me, and it might not even be required. It might just be something that I become aware of something, and I just ready to shift it, and I'll shift it. And so that's really the conversation today, was those things. And what's interesting is that I don't normally talk so much about anything to anyone when I am in this space. I'm really, really quiet about it. And so I don't know if it is any value to anyone out there. And it's just sharing an experience of what it is where I go when I go into these spaces. And it is really that sharing and that acknowledging that we do go into these spaces once in a while, and just kind of, I get a sense that by talking about it in this way, that when it happens for you, and it probably will show up in a different way, that you may give yourself more allowance when it shows up, and be aware of what else is possible and what else you can choose. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll do this again next week, same time, same place. And yeah, so what else is possible, and what else can we play with? And we'll see what shows up next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.